Okay, so this week we learned about perfect square roots and how we basically just have to have them memorized, as the only other way to find them is with a calculator. Well, what about an irrational number? A square root that doesn't have a perfect root. How do we find that value? Well, you can use a calculator, but I can tell you you're going to come to a point where you're not allowed to use a calculator, so you have to approximate. So when we approximate, we're determining what position on the number line this irrational number falls between. So let's look at this one. So the square root of 27. Square root of 27 is irrational. Okay, we can't find it without a calculator. It's a number that goes on forever without repeating. So our first step to do this is we have to determine the consecutive whole numbers that it's between, meaning what two values, they come one after the other. So consecutive whole numbers would be 2 and 3, 8 and 9, 13 and 14. There are numbers that come one right after the other. That's what consecutive means. And we want the whole number that they fall between. So when we do this, we're going to think of the perfect square. So what I would write in is the two perfect squares that it falls between. Because when we're all said and done, it's the square root of 27, okay? So the perfect squares that falls between, okay, the lower one would be 25 and the higher one would be 36. This is where your notes from Monday's class and your flashcards are going to come in handy. So what we do after we have found that step one, those are the two perfect roots in between, meaning the two consecutive whole numbers that the square root of 27 falls between are 5 and 6. So somewhere the value of the square root of 27 is going to be 5 point something. It's going to be bigger than 5, but smaller than 6. So that's step one. Step two, what we're going to do is we're going to take the irrational number we're looking for, which would be in this case 27. And we are going to subtract the lower perfect square, which is 25. Okay, that gives us 2. With me so far? But we're making a fraction. We're doing a ratio. Okay? Then we're going to take the bigger perfect square in this example was 36, and the smaller was 25. That gives us 11. So our numerator is always the number we're working with and the smaller. Our denominator is always the bigger minus the smaller square root, okay? We should never have a negative number, and that's why we work with this in this format. So what we're looking at right now is we are looking at 5 and 2 11ths. But I want to know this. Notice what it says, to the nearest 10th. That's 1 decimal place, okay? So I'm going to take the answers that I did in step 1 and 2. That's what's right here. From step 1 was 5, and step 2 was 2 11ths. Well, this is why we reviewed converting a fraction to a decimal last week, so you might want those notes. I need to convert 2 11ths into a decimal. So remember what I do. I'm going to make my fraction. I'm going to put 2 here and 11 here, okay? Then I simply divide. What that ends up with is approximately 5.2. So if I'm rounding to the nearest 10th, I really need to go to the 100th place to find it. Okay, let's focus on this left one. So remember your steps. Step 1 is we're going to determine what two perfect squares it falls between. Well, I'm looking at 135. So I have 121 and 144. The square root of 121 is 11, and the square root of 144 is 12. So my final answer is going to be 11 point something. Bigger than 11, but smaller than 12. So remember what I do. I take the rational number I'm working with, and I subtract my smaller perfect square. I get 14. Then I take my larger perfect square, subtract my smaller, and I get 23. I take both answers. So it's going to be 11 and 14/23. That's if you could leave it in fraction form. But remember, they wanted it to the nearest tenth. So I set up my division. I put my numerator inside, my denominator outside, put a decimal point, and I start working. Okay? What you're going to need to do is really you need to find this value here. I'm actually going to erase that so you don't get confused, because it's not a 0 that's going to go there, but rather I need to find the number that goes here and the number that goes here. This one tells me where to round this one, okay? I'm not doing it for you because I want you to practice that. But when you divide 14 and 23, you get 11.6, okay? So what I want you to do now is I want you to try to find and approximate the square root of 57 on your own. Could you whip out a calculator? Perhaps, but that's not going to help you, because when you do this in class, you don't get a calculator, you have to show the work. So this was a shorter video. I did 2 examples with you. So all I need you to do is take your time, go back through, and look again. It's okay if you don't understand it. You will get there. Okay, that's it for tonight, and we will practice more tomorrow.